report the chaos. We reveal the agenda.
In the unforgiving landscape of the Pakistan-Afghanistan border, there is a conflict that defies all logic. It is a war waged by a ghost against its own creator, a geopolitical paradox where a nation's greatest victory became its deadliest mistake. For decades, Pakistan pursued one overriding existential goal: strategic depth. To secure its western frontier with a friendly, strategically pliable government in Kabul, a buffer state primarily against its ancient rival, India. To achieve this depth, Islamabad needed proxies, and in the chaos of the post-Soviet Afghan civil war in the early 1990s, the mullahs, the students, the Taliban emerged as the perfect candidate. By the mid-1990s, Pakistan's Directorate for Inter-Services Intelligence, the ISI, was intimately involved. They provided support to Mullah Muhammad Omar in Kandahar, bankrolled their operations, and even trained them. Pakistan was one of only 3 nations on Earth to recognize the Taliban's first Islamic emirate. When the U.S. invasion in 2001 toppled the Taliban, Pakistan's strategic project went underground. For 20 years, the AT leadership was sheltered, advised, and resupplied from safe havens deep inside Pakistan's border regions. Pakistan's investment was sustained, costly, and many argued, ultimately successful. On August 15, 2021, the world watched in stunned silence as the Afghan Taliban, the ISI's long-term proxy, reclaimed Kabul. Strategic depth had been achieved, but the celebrations were short-lived. In the euphoria of victory, a terrible truth was revealed. Pakistan had not installed a friendly puppet. They had empowered an entire ideology, and within that ideology, a dangerous fraternal twin was born: the Tehrik-i-Taliban Pakistan, or TTP. The TTP, emboldened by the victory of their Afghan counterparts, turned their guns on the Pakistani state. The student had become the master's enemy. From bustling markets to military convoys, no target was safe. A wave of terror swept across Pakistan. The Pakistani military, once the TTP's covert supporter, was now its sworn enemy. Operation Zarb-e-Azba was launched, a massive offensive to reclaim the tribal areas. The fighting was brutal and unforgiving. The hunter had become the hunted in a landscape it knew all too well. But the TTP was not just a military force. It was an ideology that Pakistan itself had helped to cultivate. The Afghan Taliban's return to power in Kabul created a new dilemma for Pakistan. They had their strategic depth, but it came with a heavy price. The TTP and the Afghan Taliban share a common ideology and deep-rooted ethnic ties. The border between Pakistan and Afghanistan, always porous, now seemed to disappear entirely. For the TTP, the border was a mere suggestion. For Pakistan, it was a bleeding wound. The Afghan Taliban, now the rulers of Afghanistan, found themselves in a precarious position. They were under pressure from Pakistan to crack down on the TTP, but they were reluctant to turn against their ideological brethren. Islamabad grew increasingly frustrated. The very proxy they had nurtured for decades was now harboring a group that was actively at war with the Pakistani state. Caught in the middle of this geopolitical chess game were the people. Millions were displaced, their lives shattered by a conflict they had no part in creating. Today, the conflict continues. A fragile stalemate exists, with the TTP weakened but not defeated, and the region remains on a knife's edge. Pakistan's quest for strategic depth had led it into a trap of its own making. The patron had become a victim of its own proxy. The story of the TTP is a cautionary tale about the dangers of proxy wars and the unpredictable nature of blowback. In the end, the fire that was meant to burn others consumed the one who lit it. The Afghan Taliban's return to power in Kabul created a new dilemma for Pakistan. They had their strategic depth, but it came with a heavy price. For the TTP, the victory of their brothers in Afghanistan meant a safe haven, a source of weapons, and a renewed sense of purpose. Pakistan demanded that the new Afghan government crack down on the TTP, but the Taliban, indebted to their old allies, were reluctant to act. The patron now found itself at the mercy of its own creation, pleading with its proxy to control the monster it had unleashed. Caught in the middle of this geopolitical chess game were the people of the border regions. Their lives were shattered by a conflict they did not choose. Today, the war continues. A fragile stalemate holds, but the TTP remains a potent threat, a constant reminder of a policy gone horribly wrong. This is the patron's trap. In its quest for strategic depth, Pakistan created a monster it could not control, a monster that now threatens to consume it. The question is no longer who the victor serves. The question is whether the patron can survive its own victory. The TTP and the Afghan Taliban share a common ideology and deep-rooted ethnic ties. The border between Pakistan and Afghanistan, always porous, now seemed to disappear. Kabul, now under Taliban control, became a safe haven for TTP leaders. Pakistan's former proxies were now harboring its greatest internal threat. Islamabad demanded action. They pressured the Afghan Taliban to crack down on the TTP, to honor their promises of not allowing Afghan soil to be used for attacks against other nations. But the Afghan Taliban were caught in a bind. Attacking the TTP would mean betraying their ideological brethren, risking a civil war within their own ranks. The result was a deadly game of cat and mouse. The Afghan Taliban would make token efforts to appease Pakistan, while the TTP continued to launch attacks from across the border. For the people of Pakistan, the patron's trap was no longer a geopolitical theory. It was a brutal, daily reality. The state that had sought strategic depth now found itself in a strategic nightmare. The very tool it had created to project power had turned on it with a vengeance. The war against the TTP continues to this day, a bloody testament to the law of unintended consequences. A reminder that when you create a monster, you can't always control it. The TTP, the Pakistani Taliban, was forged in 2007, rooted in the same Pashtun Deobandi ideology as their Afghan counterparts. But their target was singular, the Pakistani state. In 2021, the AT victory delivered the TTP an unparalleled operational boost. Thousands of battle-hardened fighters, detained during the previous regime, walked free from Parwan and Pul-e-Charkhi prisons during the Kabul takeover. They immediately flooded back across the porous border. The TTP's war machine is terrifyingly resilient. Crucially, they do not rely on Islamabad's old lifeline. Their funding is decentralized, built on a ruthless, self-sustaining criminal economy, kidnapping for ransom and extortion. This financial autonomy makes them impervious to Pakistan's economic pressures. But the blowback is not just about funding. It's about institutional betrayal. The two groups, the rulers of Kabul and the terrorists targeting Islamabad, are bound by a powerful strategic nexus. The TTP fought alongside the AT for 20 years against NATO. This historical fraternal debt is deemed more sacred than any obligation to the Pakistani state. Pakistan's establishment believed their old ally, the Afghan Taliban, would simply tighten the leash on the TTP. But for 4 years after 2021, the response from Kabul has been nothing but hollow promises and inaction. The sanctuary remained open, and the attacks began to escalate dramatically. The year 2023 saw a 17% rise in terrorist incidents across Pakistan. And in the volatile regions of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Balochistan, the attacks intensified at an alarming rate. Pakistan was now under fire from the very sanctuary it had painstakingly built. But the deepest betrayal of all lay in the shadow government of Afghanistan. The single individual who holds the key to the TTP safe haven is the Afghan Interior Minister, Sirajuddin Haqqani, leader of the notorious Haqqani network. Sirajuddin Haqqani, as the network's leader, views these groups not as threats, but as essential allies in a long-term regional strategy. To him, the bond forged in war against a common enemy is more important than diplomatic assurances given to Pakistan. This protection provides the TTP with the ultimate safe haven, allowing them to train, recruit, and launch attacks with impunity, all under the nose of the very state Pakistan once championed. The Haqqani network, once Pakistan's most effective proxy against Indian influence, is now the TTP's institutional shield. HQN's source of power lies in its ability to manage a wide array of militant groups, including the TTP. With Haqqani as interior minister in Kabul, the AT's refusal to dismantle the TTP sanctuary is institutionalized. The TTP uses this protection to launch increasingly complex and devastating attacks. In late 2025, militants, including a suicide bomber, attempted to storm the Army-run cadet college in Wana, South Waziristan. The ferocity of the assault forced a direct comparison from the military to the 2014 Peshawar school massacre. Pakistan was caught in the PATRON'S trap. It had trained the AT so well and relied on the HQN so heavily that it provided the exact blueprint, the shared institutional knowledge, the supply lines, the safe routes that the TTP now uses to wage war against its former sponsor. Diplomacy collapsed. Multiple rounds of negotiations, mediated by countries like Qatar and Turkey, reached a bitter deadlock. Islamabad demanded written guarantees that Afghan soil would not be used for attacks, a guarantee the AT refused to provide. The failure of diplomacy led to coercion. Pakistan began aggressive cross-border strikes, targeting alleged militant hideouts deep inside Afghanistan. In March 2024, and again in December 2024, Pakistani jets hit Afghan territory. The AT retaliated with artillery fire and intense border clashes, killing dozens of soldiers and civilians on both sides, particularly in the Kurram and Spin Boldak regions. The core structural fault driving this daily bloodshed? The Afghan Taliban's persistent ideological rejection of the Durand Line as the official border. End of Part 3. The escalating border war had a chilling effect on regional stability. International investors, once optimistic about Pakistan's economic future, began to pull out. The conflict paralyzed trade routes, including the vital Torkham border crossing, causing economic hardship on both sides. The United States, seeking to maintain a fragile peace in the region, found itself in an impossible position. It could not alienate the Afghan Taliban, a necessary partner in counter-terrorism efforts against ISIS-K, nor could it abandon its long-standing, albeit strained, alliance with Pakistan. Ultimately, the PATRON'S trap snapped shut. Pakistan's creation had turned against it, leaving the country more isolated and insecure than ever before. The true geopolitical cost was not just measured in lives or dollars, but in the strategic bankruptcy of a decades-old policy. This escalating conflict carries significant geopolitical costs, threatening regional stability and creating opportunities for further terrorist activity. A geopolitical landscape in South Asia has been dramatically reshaped, with profound consequences for regional stability. The breakdown with the Afghan Taliban was more than a security crisis. It was a geopolitical rupture, and it immediately created an opportunity for Pakistan's rival. India, long an antagonist to the Taliban, adopted a strategic rapprochement. New Delhi reopened its embassy in Kabul and began functional engagement, offering trade and cooperation on humanitarian issues. The AT, seeing Pakistan's coercion, eagerly embraced this opening, desperate to find reliable partners outside of Islamabad. The AT's move to diversify ties effectively eliminated Pakistan's long-term economic leverage. When Islamabad retaliated by closing key crossings like Torham and Spin Boldak, paralyzing trade, Kabul simply declared the Pakistan route high risk and began actively seeking alternative trade routes through Central Asian neighbors like Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. The cost is now measured in human suffering. The escalating conflict, fueled by the TTP and Baloch separatist groups, has created massive waves of displacement. By the end of 2023, an estimated 1.2 million people were internally displaced in Pakistan due to conflict and climate shocks. Pakistan's defense minister has frequently resorted to public blame, accusing India of backing the anti-Pakistan elements in Kabul, a desperate attempt to deflect attention from the core institutional failure. But the truth is harsher. The blowback is self-inflicted. The patron's trap is complete. The illusion of strategic depth, the belief that you can control a powerful proxy, has been shattered. Pakistan is now locked in a long-term conflict with the terror network it empowered, while its rival, India, steps into the diplomatic vacuum created by the crisis. The question is no longer if Pakistan will defeat the terror threat, but how long the country can bear the cost of a decades-old policy that has finally, tragically, returned home. Meanwhile, the shifting alliances have not gone unnoticed by other global powers. China, a long-standing ally of Pakistan and a heavy investor in the region through its Belt and Road Initiative, finds itself in a precarious position. Beijing is now forced to navigate a complex web of interests, balancing its support for Islamabad with the need for stability in Afghanistan to protect its investments. Publicly, China calls for dialogue, but privately, it grows wary of the escalating instability on its western border. Russia, too, watches with caution, seeing a potential quagmire for Pakistan and an opportunity for India. Moscow has adopted a pragmatic wait-and-see approach, engaging with all sides but committing to none, seeking to prevent the spread of extremism into Central Asia. The great game continues with new players and higher stakes. As Pakistan grapples with the consequences of its past policies, the entire region holds its breath, waiting to see who will ultimately pay the geopolitical price. Thank you for watching ATM.